Let's talk about section 3 of Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. So, there's a whole bunch of points here. I'm going to go through these. Not necessarily, I'm going to hit on all of them. You don't have to put them all in the workbook, but only way to get the best of an argument is to avoid it. So, as you can tell in this book, being a conflict resolver is one of the quick ways to win friends and influence people. Don't be the person who's always, I'm an ENTP in personality type, which means it's called the debater. We're naturally a little more argumentative. I've had to learn over time that that's dangerous, okay? Next, show respect for the other person's opinion, even if you don't agree with it. Abraham Lincoln said he learned from everybody, even if it was what not to do. Sometimes, I forget who said it. It was a smart guy, and I was reading a book. I think it was Charlie Munger, actually. He said, there's no rule in life that you have to say everything you're thinking. So when you're talking to somebody, don't completely agree. There's no rule you have to say it to them. When you're wrong, admit it quickly. I always say the simplest, most powerful proverb I've ever heard is this: gentle answer turns away wrath. So when someone's mad at you because you did something wrong, if you just said, oops, my bad, I've found this, and you can test this. If you say, oops, my bad 7 times to somebody, maybe in slightly different phrases each time, no one can stay mad after 7 times, unless you did something, diabolical or something, like you shot somebody. But for the most part, normal errors that you make, if you just get in that habit of being like, oh, damn, my bad, people are empathetic. Even the most ruthless person eventually gives up. I had an investor once who was just almost a billion. I don't know if he was a billionaire, but about at a billion dollar level, and he was not used to people not agreeing with him, and he was a very powerful guy. And I remember he got mad at me for something, and I wasn't even really at fault. But I was just like, oops, my bad, didn't mean to make you feel that way. And he was still mad. And it took, after 7 different ways of saying it, he just gave up, moved on. So it's important, you can fight, you can fight 1,000 battles in life, or you can remember what Joel Salatin told me. He said, Ty, choose your battles. You can't win every battle. The greatest general in the world picks and chooses and retreats sometimes, and there's no shame in retreating sometimes from conflict with people. Begin in a friendly way. There's been a lot of science since this book was written. There's one, it's on game theory. Dr. David Buss writes about this in his evolutionary psychology textbook. I'm sorry, not Dr. Buss. Richard Dawkins wrote about this in The Selfish Gene. What's the best way to interact with people? And millions of permutations and combinations have been run on complex computers on what's the best, they call it game theory, best way to deal with uncertain circumstances, like meeting someone new. And every single time, the winner comes back, start out friendly, and then reciprocate. So what that basically means is, when you're in the unknown, start out nice. Always start out nice. And you see people socially, that's why smiling's so important. People start out socially in a bad frame of mind, like being negative. Well, that's been proven by these guys who won Nobel Prizes to be a losing strategy. So you start out nice, and then if they turn into a-holes, then you can be, then you can either move away from the situation or be a little bit negative. But never start out mean, okay? Get the other person saying yes, yes immediately. There's something called commitment consistency bias, where what that means, C. Aldini wrote a book called Influence. It's one of the top psychology books written in our time. And he said, for example, let's say there's a girl or a guy you want to take to coffee. You don't want to start by saying, do you want to go to coffee with me? Why? Because there's a 50-50 chance they're going to say no, right? But get them saying yes to things they're going to say yes. Like if you see them drinking coffee, like, oh, you're a big coffee, you like coffee? Oh yeah. And then you get them saying something yes, like, do you drink coffee fairly often? Yes. And then you say, hey, would you like to have coffee with me? You want to pull the trigger on about the 3rd or 4th yes. So you get them saying simply yes. This is very powerful for sales and persuasion. Never go straight to the close. Always start getting people going, yes, I agree with that. Yes, I agree with that. And it's that much easier for them to be committed and consistent. That's what the commitment consistency bias means there the next time to say yes. Let other people do a great deal of the talking. You know, I sometimes, especially on the phone, I just put the phone on mute, let people talk. Let them get out. Some people have a minimum amount of words they have to say before they're even going to listen to you. So you just put it on mute, go on your treadmill, let them talk for a while. I once did, the record is, I have a guy who works for me, went for 1 hour and 5 minutes without realizing I had him on mute. He talked that long. It was a funny experiment, but it just proved to me, and I've seen that over and over. People like to hear themselves talk. Just let them, you know. Let other people feel that the idea is theirs. This is important. Don't always be somebody that takes credit for stuff. You know, if there's a way to give other people credit, especially in a business setting, if you're motivating a team, being a leader, it's very important. One of the things in the workbook that I want you to write is the ratio of times you start out nice versus starting out negative. So fill that out in the workbook. And then another one you'll see, what's your conflict ratio? So what percentage of conversations end up in conflict? So is it 5, 10, 8, hopefully not 80. With me, it's probably around 30. I'm kind of high. You want to keep that probably below 20. Okay. We talked about this before, how to see things from other people's point of view. Be sympathetic. When somebody has a different political view of you, try to figure out what the heck motivated them there. Sometimes it's real reasons. You know, sometimes somebody's a liberal or conservative because somebody in their life had a bad experience the other way. And when you have a little bit of empathy, even if you don't necessarily agree, you can connect with them. And this book's all about that connection. You got to connect with people. Appeal to the nobler motives. And this is, again, there's a great book by a guy named Oren Clough, a friend of mine, and he teaches people how to raise investment capital. He's raised over $2 billion for himself and businesses. And he says, you know, there's different frames you can speak to people. And one of them, he calls it moral authority. He says it's the most powerful of all frames. You can use regular authority, but in this book, Win Funds and Influence People, they talk about nobler motives. So talk about lofty stuff. Talk about your ideals to people. People respect that. It gives you a new sense of moral authority in their mind. Don't just talk, you know, completely about goofy stuff. Every once in a while, try to bring it around to some higher purpose conversation. Okay, dramatize your ideas. Simpler way to say that, tell them as a story. One of the most powerful words you can ever say to get people's attention is, let me tell you a crazy story. Let me tell you a cool story. Those opening words, I've tested this. I do a lot of public speaking. If I see out in the crowd, I call it the cell phone test. If too many people are looking down on their cell phones texting and I'm losing the audience and I'm not connecting with them, I always take a deep breath and go, you know what? Let me tell you guys a crazy story of something that just happened to me. And this probably has happened to you. And then you go in and talk about specific things. I was at Sizzler restaurant. I don't know why I picked Sizzler. I was on a Norwegian Airlines, and this lady walked next to me. And by using stories, you key into actually how the brain works. The brain doesn't do that much figurative stuff. It does actual real life story processing. Throw down a challenge. This is an interesting one. You know, sometimes this is where you could be fun and challenging without being a person that brings it to conflict. So maybe if you're at a dinner party, you're walking up to people, you don't know them, you know, throw out a challenge. Let's say, God forbid, you end up talking about politics, which again, in this book, you probably want to stay away from, because one of the keys of Dale Carnegie is try to not start with too much conflict. But you can throw out a funny challenge. You can say something, I would say something like, all right, so you're a Democrat or you're a Republican. All right, I'm going to do a challenge. Let's challenge each other. 3 reasons we're both wrong. It's fun. And you know what it does? It creates empathy and sympathy with both of you. And as you start listing off how you both might be wrong, guess what? You'll connect in that middle ground. So, all right. So I want you to write down, by the way, in the workbook, I want you to find the person that drives you the most crazy and write out a challenge to them. If you can't think of one, use the one that I did. It could be a spouse, could be somebody you're disagreeing with, a business partner. What's a challenge, a fun challenge that won't end in nasty conflict, okay? If you can't think of one, just fill out the one I gave you. 3 reasons why we might both be wrong. That's not in the book, by the way, but that's why I said this. Make sure you watch these videos, because these are going to expand a lot of the stuff. You know, this book was written a while ago, so there's a lot of new research and science that can help you. Okay, next part. How to be a leader. How to change people without giving an offense or arousing resentment. Remember, this is the ninja advanced stuff of the book. First 3 things are basically how to get started and become really good socially. This last one is the hardest, which is how to change people through leadership. Trust me, it's not easy. I've been in leadership position as an entrepreneur for a long time, and I still am not perfect at this, not even close. So I need this book too. And so one of the things that I like to do is read biographies. And I was talking about Phil Jackson, the great basketball coach who's won 13 championships, and Michael Jordan. It got the respect of the greatest athletes of all time. And one of the principles is call attention to people's mistakes indirectly. Indirectly. Don't always be like, Bob, you suck at this. Sometimes speak in generalities. People will know you're talking about them. And that also follows the general principle of the book about not always being in direct conflict with people. You're going to get in conflict, and that's a natural state, but you have to minimize it, especially with people you don't have strong social bonds. So if somebody's worked with you for 10 years or been your best friend or you're married to them, you can have a little more conflict because you have strong bonds there. This book is specifically around, increasing your social life. If you're introverted, how to become more extroverted, how to get out into the crowd. So use indirect correction if you can. Talk about your own mistakes. Very, very important. All great speakers know how to use it's called self-deprecation. If you have no self-deprecation in your storyline, you will repel people. Be honest with people about the mistakes you've made. It's a very powerful tool, and it shows that you're humble, and it shows that you're a real person, because nobody's perfect. And if you come off with too much pride, I always say the 4 things that keep people from success: pride, stubbornness, oversensitivity, and flakiness. Those are the 4 things that really can keep you from being successful. And pride I put as first, because it's kind of like Alcoholics Anonymous. The first step to overcome alcoholism is you got to admit you have a mistake. And if you can't do that, they don't let you go to the other 11 steps. No, it's the same way in life. You got to be willing to go, I don't know everything. Warren Buffett, go watch some YouTube videos by Warren Buffett. He is the king. He always talks, it's funny. Warren Buffett's one of the most successful businessmen. Almost nothing he's touched has ever failed. So people ask him, have you made mistakes? And he's always like, oh yeah, I've made so many mistakes. But he actually's only really made one ever. So he always tells that story about how he invested, I think, in American Airlines, and how he lost, he ended up making $100 million, but he thought he should have made $1 billion. So even a guy that hardly has ever failed still has his go-to story of his failure. And you really want to have that in life. And let the other person save face. This is important, Now, I got ahead of myself for a second. Go in the workbook. What is your story that you can tell that's your example of failure? So you need one of those in conversations that you can bring up something so that you connect with people. Everybody's failed. People connect on success, but they also connect on failure. And there's more failure in the world than there is success. So write down what your story is, please, in the workbook. Okay. And now, if you're coming back here, let the other person save face. If someone does something wrong, don't make them do a weepy confession in front of everybody. Move on. They get the point. There's no point. You don't need to degrade people. You don't need to grind them into the ground. Once in a while, you will have to. I'm going to tell you, this is the sad truth. There are some people that just, like I used to train dogs, and some dogs they're not going to listen. You have to train them over and over and grind them into, not physically grind them into the ground. What I mean is, repetition. Most people don't need that. And if you start doing it to them, they're just going to disappear. Okay. Praise the slightest improvement and praise every improvement. Dale Carnegie says, be hearty in your approbation and lavish in your praise. So be stingy in pointing out the flaws and be lavish and over generous in praising. That's a key one. In fact, I'd recommend putting that one to memory. Be hearty in your approbation, or you could say be hearty in your criticism and lavish in your praise. I would change it for modern English. I'd say be stingy with criticism and generous with praise. How about that? Give the other person a fine reputation to live up to. This is cool. One way to motivate people is start saying they're that thing before they are that thing. And this is a little mental trip. So let's say somebody's always late. You can start praising them as like, you know what I like about this person? I know they're always going to be on time. And people, going back to commitment consistency, they don't like to lose reputation. So it's a little subtle trick. You can. My friend has kids, and Herman, Dr. Fresco, he wanted them to do martial arts and jiu-jitsu with me. And I said, he wanted to force the kids to come do lessons. I said, don't do that. The way to do it is bring the kids when we're doing it. Don't tell them that this is only for adults. They're not allowed to do it. And let them sit there for about 2 weeks. Then finally, so that's basically seduction marketing. They're getting excited. They're coming to you like, Dad, when can I do martial arts? And then at the end, you use this technique. Then you start saying, well, you know, my kids are pretty strong. You are pretty strong. You are pretty coordinated. I probably should let you do this, right? And then they have the fine reputation to live up to. A very powerful tool of persuasion. Use encouragement. Make the fault seem easy to correct. So don't when you do have to lay down the law, be very specific. Best advice my mom ever gave me, she said, be specific when you criticize people. So don't say, you know what, you suck at everything. Say, dude, you are always late. Everything else you're doing is great. This one thing is messing everything up. Let's fix that one thing. I know you're a dependable person. This comes back to fine reputation. So say to them, you're dependable in everything. I know you can be dependable in time. People want to live up to that. Last point, make the other person happy about doing the things you suggest. Have you read the books by Mark Twain where it talks about Huckleberry Finn and how the kid painted the fence, and then all the other kids wanted to do it, but he wouldn't let him? And then finally he let him and disappeared, and they painted the fence for him. They were excited about doing this stuff. So you got to get good at not only, connecting with people, but also knowing how to encourage them. Get them excited. Literally get people excited. If you have the ability to bring out the best energy in people, very powerful. So, workbook. What's somebody that's frustrating you right now that you can give a specific reputation to ahead of time? What do you want to say? So think of somebody that's frustrating you. What's something you want to start saying to them so that they're going to live up to that new standard? All right, it's a lot of stuff, but this is a lot quicker than reading the book. So you got it in under an hour. And make sure you go through the workbook. Make sure you check the other videos. There's lots of other good stuff. And thanks for being part of Mentor Box.